The tale I'm about to tell is an intensely personal one, full of experiences I never imagined I would encounter. It all began with trust, curiosity, and the intricacies of human connections. My husband and I have been married for over 7 years, and throughout that time, we've built a life together filled with love, joy, and occasional challenges. However, I never expected one of those challenges to come in the form of betrayal masked as romance and seduction. A few months ago, during one of our regular Friday nights at home, my husband, whom I'll call David for the purpose of this story, invited his friend over for drinks. Matt had always been a close part of our lives. He was there when David and I first met, and he had stood by David as one of the best men at our wedding. Over time, Matt and I had grown close too. He was always charming, funny, and knew how to ease any tension. I had no reason to think anything out of the ordinary would occur that night. As the evening went on, we discussed a variety of topics, ranging from work to our future plans, until the conversation unexpectedly shifted. David, whom I assumed was joking at the time, mentioned exploring new experiences in our intimate life. He suggested that some couples try to spice things up by inviting others into their bedroom. I laughed, thinking it was one of those light-hearted conversations that occur after a few drinks. But David didn't stop there. He continued, talking about how much he trusted Matt, how long they'd been friends, and how exciting it could be for us to try something different. I was shocked. Was he serious? I had never considered being with anyone besides David, let alone sharing a moment with his best friend. My mind raced, but I didn't want to overreact. Perhaps the alcohol was influencing him. Yet, as the conversation continued, it became clear that David wasn't joking. He reassured me that it was just an idea, something we could discuss and decide on together. He made it sound like it was about trust and exploring boundaries in a safe, loving environment. Matt, sitting silently, wore a knowing smile, as if this had already been discussed between them. I felt confused. On one hand, I loved my husband and trusted him. On the other hand, the idea of doing something like this was way outside my comfort zone. But David kept talking, convincing me that it wasn't about betrayal or dishonesty, but rather about adding excitement to our marriage. He believed it would bring us closer, that it would be something we shared as a couple. The way he spoke, it sounded like he genuinely thought it would strengthen our relationship. Part of me was intrigued. Honestly, the idea of trying something so different, stepping outside what I thought was possible, began to pull me in. David and Matt seemed to sense my uncertainty and began painting a picture of how it could unfold. They described it in such a romantic, almost magical way. Slow, sensual, and completely under my control. If at any point I felt uncomfortable, we could stop. It would all be about my pleasure. Before I knew it, David leaned in to kiss me, and Matt was watching. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. I didn't push David away, but I didn't fully embrace the kiss either. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. Then Matt moved closer, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. I could feel the tension, the anticipation, and instead of stopping, I let myself get carried away. What started as a simple kiss between David and me quickly became more, with Matt observing us. Slowly, David pulled away and motioned for Matt to come closer. I didn't stop him. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I trusted David too much. Maybe I thought that if this was what he wanted, I should at least try it. Matt kissed me gently at first, and I felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, guilt, confusion. The night unfolded in ways I never thought it would. It was slow, just like David had promised, and for a brief moment, I felt lost in the sensations. There was something thrilling about it, something that drew me in, despite the inner voice telling me this wasn't right. David was there the whole time, reassuring me, touching me, making me feel like everything was okay. But as the night went on, the reality began to settle in. I wasn't just with my husband, I was with his best friend, too. While part of me enjoyed the physical sensations, another part felt deeply unsettled. What had I just done? Had I crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? Why had David, the man I trusted above all, encouraged me to do this? When the night ended, we sat in silence. The mood had shifted, and the weight of what had happened pressed down on me. I couldn't look at David, and I couldn't look at Matt. I felt ashamed, confused, and above all, betrayed. David had convinced me this was about trust, about strengthening our bond, but all I felt was a growing distance between us. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I hadn't been tricked in the traditional sense, but I had been manipulated. David had presented it as an act of love and trust, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was selfish, manipulative, and completely out of line with the relationship I thought we shared. I started pulling away from David, replaying that night over and over in my mind. How had I allowed myself to get swept up in something so reckless? More importantly, how had David convinced me it was a good idea? It wasn't long before I confronted him. I told him how I felt, how wrong everything seemed in hindsight. I told him I didn't feel closer to him. I felt further away than ever. He tried to reassure me, saying it had been a one-time thing that wouldn't change anything between us, but the damage had been done. Something had shifted in our relationship, something that couldn't be undone. I began to realize that the night hadn't been about strengthening our bond. It had been about David's fantasy, his desire to push boundaries I wasn't comfortable with. The involvement of Matt, someone I trusted, made it worse. It felt like betrayal on multiple levels. As time passed, the distance between David and me only grew. I couldn't trust him the same way anymore, and each time I looked at him, I was reminded of that night. Eventually, we decided to separate. It wasn't an easy choice, but I knew I couldn't remain in a relationship where trust had been so severely broken. Looking back, I realized I should have trusted my instincts more. I should have trusted myself and not let David convince me this was something I wanted. The experience taught me a lot about boundaries, trust, and the importance of standing firm in what feels right, even when pressured by someone you love. It was a painful lesson, but one I needed to learn. Once trust is broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. And sometimes the people we think we know the best can surprise us in the most painful ways.